No nii, tere, ilusat pärastlõunat teile kõigile. I'm trying to be as bilingual as possible today because we have some international friends here today with us in this beautiful hall. Nii et proovime siis kuidagi kahes keeles seda sündmust siin täna läbi viia, et kõik saaksid aru, millest täpselt juttu on ja millised küsimused meil üleval on. Welcome to celebrate actually the 25th anniversary at the Venice Architecture Biennale, 25 years and beyond, because the history is not going to stop here. But of course, we have to look forward to make plans about our future participations. Estonia will be there for sure. Loomulikult valdkonnal tõenäoliselt on käed-jalad praegu tööd täis ja ma arvan, et pea mõtetest plahvatamas, sellepärast et nagu me oleme uudistestki lugenud, Tallinna linnahalliga on ju suured plaanid ometi. Olete jälginud uudiseid, jah? Ma ei tea, kui palju see linnahalli niisugune uudispomm meie tänaseid arutelusid siin mõjutama peaks või kas üldse peaks. Aga see tegelikult näitab, et see pisikene torm, mis on tekkinud, näitabki seda, kui oluline tegelikult on arhitektuur, üleüldse ehitatud niisugune avalik ruum, mis omakorda mõjutab ju ka meie mõtteruumi. Just a quick translation. Tallinn City Concert Hall, which has been standing idle, as the seamen would say. Now the mayor of Tallinn has suggested that the building should be torn down, even though it's under protection. It's a national monument. So I'm pretty sure that all the architects here in Estonia are eagerly waiting what's going to happen to the building and how come can something as big as such scaled building to be torn down like that. But we will see. Aga kui ikkagi niisugused suured asjad meil päevakorral on, siis tõenäoliselt on asjakohane ikkagi esitada teatud küsimusi, kui me nüüd biennaali juurde jälle tagasi tuleme. Kas me üldse peame? Speaking of the biennal, do we have to participate? Mida me sellest kõigest saame? What is it we gain out of it? Kas tähtis on kvaliteet või pigem nähtavus? What's more important, the quality of our exhibition or the visibility? Kas me tahame teha mõne poliitilise statemendi äkki? Is the political possible statement important for us? Mis on üldse niisuguse hea näituse valem? What's the formula of a good exhibition? Mis see kõik meie riigile maksma läheb? What does it cost to our government to participate at such a biennal? Ja kuidas seda kõike korraldada? Kes peaks seda tegema? Who should be and who shouldn't be in charge? So let's keep the open mind here today. Hoiame siis meeled avatuna. Ühtegi rumalat küsimust ei ole, absoluutselt kõik mõtted on teretulnud, vahetame neid täna selles ringis, kus on seda turvaline teha. In this environment today, of course, all the questions will be good questions. Aga enne, kui me päriselt teemadesse tungime ja ettekandeid kuulama hakkame, et luua paremat konteksti, on hea meel paluda Xenia Joost, Kultuuriministeeriumi, nüüd on siis loomingu valdkonna asekantsler, Undersecretary for the Arts from the Ministry of Culture of Estonia, mis siis Xenia Joost.
Thank you, Meelis. That was just amazing how you did it in 2 languages at once. So I will not be so polite as you were, and I'll do it only in English. So pardon for that, my Estonian friends. But maybe faster this way as well. So you can go for more deeper and insightful conversation. It's wonderful to see you all here today, and especially I would like to welcome the guests who have arrived from abroad, our neighbors from Finland, Lithuania, UK, and as far as Canada. Wow. Thank you. And of course, our community from Estonia. It's a reminder that we are indeed part of one ecosystem. Estonia architecture resonates far beyond our own borders within this creative ecosystem, which is something truly wonderful. Architecture is one great example of how creative force goes far beyond imagination alone and transfer into the physical world. how ecosystems stretch far beyond countries and the languages, and how creation reaches far beyond the limits of time. So many of you have been part of the Veneetsia Biennale story for over the past 25 years, as you mentioned before. Some of you were there at the very beginning, a quarter of century. Wow, that is a long-term commitment and relationship. Thank you. It means a great deal, and I'm truly glad you've taken the time to be here today as well. There's no doubt. You had a lot of questions before, Meelis, but for me, definitely, there's no doubt that Veneetsia is the world's largest architecture event, and it is important for our national representation. The question needs to be answered from my part, and my very strong interest is what is our personal story to tell, and how we bring that story to life. Because one thing is certain, here in Estonia, we do have stories to tell. And those stories are our own stories. They are personal, and they resonate with the world. The second question is how we tell our story. And for that, yesterday, we announced an open call to find the organizer for our next pavilion. This year brings a unique opening, an opportunity for all of you to take a chance, show your story, your angle, your view, and step forward with your vision. Applicants have a month to develop their proposals, and today is a wonderful chance to hear directly from the field what are the expectations and the hopes. The call did take a little longer than anticipated in our side, and I do apologize for that. But as you architects already know, good things take time. And eventually, after all the bureaucracy, we are glad to offer more open ground to work from, enabled by a new legislative framework. And as an additional opportunity, the winning team will also have the possibility to seek further fundings, giving your vision the best possible chance to come fully to life. Thank you, Johanna, for the hard work that made this possible. Today's future conversations stand on the ground of the past. And what a ground it is. Estonia has proudly taken part in Venice 12 times. 12 exhibitions that have shaped how Estonian story, told through architecture, is seen and understood in the world. We have solid experience here to build on. How we carry all of that forward is both our opportunity and our responsibility. And that is exactly what we will explore here today together. I wish you all of us, to have open and inspiring afternoon. And thank you so much for being here.
Aitäh. Thank you so much. So let's act as if we were sponges to absorb all the information and inspiration from the presentations here today. Aga enne veel lihtsalt väike meeldetuletus, et kohvilaud on endiselt kaetud, et kui natuke on turgutust vaja, siis võib rahulikult püsti tõusta, võtta kohvi, tulla saali tagasi. The coffee table is still ready, so should you feel that you need more, just go help yourself. So we are going to start with around 40-minute plus lectures to be followed by brainstorming in sections later today. Each individual group will have its team lead, and we are going to depict the impact to different target groups a little bit later. But now, please welcome Johanna Jõekalda, arhitektuurinõunik, advisor for architecture, also from the Ministry of Culture of Estonia. We were jokingly thought it would be a keynote for a keynote, if that's okay.
Hey, good afternoon. It's really heartwarming to see all of you here. I think the location is also significant because only events that are relevant for our constitution are allowed to have their sessions here. And it's great to find out that we have a unified agreement that Venice Biennales are constitutionally relevant for Estonia. Before giving floor to Lev, I will start with building some framework for today. And one thing that I had in mind while preparing for today was that as a small country, we sometimes tend to have this inferiority complex. And I have always felt that we were somehow late to the Venice Biennale, starting there in year 2000, while the Biennales have been going on since 1980. But looking in its past, it turns out that actually the national pavilions at Architecture Biennale only started in 1991, when Estonia regained its independence. That way, we actually only missed the first two Biennales and have been consistently present since then. And actually, no country has been consistently present throughout all the Biennales. So I think we have done good, and we can feel quite proud of ourselves, just as we are. And it was also during this Hans Hollein Biennale in 1996 that Architecture Biennales gained this format that is well known now. So I think we entered just about the right time. We have had 12 exhibitions. I thought maybe we could do some counting, and could everybody here who has been involved in the curatorial process raise their hand? I can see 7 hands. Some are a bit shy, but something like that. Yeah, more are coming. I counted that we have actually had 53 curators. 10 of them are the Baltic curators, though, so Johan has contributed to that. But that's a huge number. And given that for each pavilion, tens of architects have been also helping out on the preparation side, building the pavilions, writing texts for the books, doing all the background work, I feel that it's probably almost half of our members of architecture associations that have been related to the Biennale. So it's really high concentration, and it's only because we have had open calls and so open platform for participation. We have been present at 8 different venues over time, and we have also 12 publications. All of them, I think, beside gas pipe, are layouted at the back of the hall. Feel free to also just take your time with the books. I thought it would be nice to have something physically present here to also see the all the thought processes that have been relevant for the projects. My talk is focusing on how we navigate in the waters of Venice, and I wanted to start with the paradox of exhibiting architecture. As we know, exhibition is not really a natural setting for architecture. Most of you who have been in Venice have probably felt this overwhelming exhaustion trying to figure out entering each exhibition, whether it is the one that is just showing archival work and documentation, whether it's an exhibition that is disguised as art and pretends to be art, or whether it's a one-to-one scale mock-up that could be perceived as architecture and then spatial experience. And this overwhelming multitude of different formats is there because architecture exhibitions don't really have one archetype. And the reason for that is that buildings usually just stand at their own place outdoor without any reason to be displayed in exhibition halls. But what is the backstory of architecture exhibitions then? Actually, the first notes on architecture exhibitions are from the Enlightenment period, where competition works were put out for public display. So the first exhibitions didn't differ that much from how jury work is done even today when the works are still printed out. This image is of a salon of an art exhibition, but similar setups were in the academies with models being displayed for students to research, and the necessity was to display something that wasn't physically there yet. Soon, also models found their place in exhibition halls, first by architects who also had established themselves as artists themselves. And soon also one-to-one scale casted objects made their way to museums' collections, causing lots of headache to the heads of museums. For instance, Eric McLagan called the Trojan columns cast an incongruous white elephant that had to be dealt with in 5 different parts on full scale in his huge cast courts. It was also a time where a master plaster caster was a position that was really valued in the museums. But those elements of architecture still feel a bit like just displaying only toes or fingers of marble statues in sculpture halls. And soon architecture made its way to world fairs, displaying temporary full-scale buildings. And actually also the first architecture biennale that happened sort of opposed to being an architecture exhibition, and also went in the way of providing an immersive experience that could be really experienced on one-to-one scale in Cordery. In Estonia, we have quite a similar lineage of this history of architecture exhibitions and the phases. During the First Republic, between the 2 world wars, our Architecture Association displayed competition works on a regular basis. And in the 70s, our more avant-garde architects gained lots of attention with their more exploratory exhibitions that were often held in research institutes, because that was a way to raise topics that were not allowed to be raised in a regular architecture discourse. Harku 1975 being the most famous of these exhibitions, and also displaying the work of Jüri Okas from Tallinn School. Now I also get to the Biennale. Tallinn School's work, a rumor goes that it was invited to be exhibited at the Biennale in the 80s. I tried to call through as many members of Tallinn School as I could, and none of them actually remembered any of that. But this 1987 excerpt from Sirp and Vasar tells that an invitation with Paolo Borghesi's signature arrived after successful exhibitions in Finland and Switzerland. No one really remembers much of that. But it's nice to still think in a way, like Valdur Mikita often puts it, that our roots have been there since the beginning of all the important cultural events. Our official representation has been organized by really different institutions at the Biennale. The first 4 were organized by our Association of Architects, And I think it's significant that all of them have had open calls, even the first one. I'm not sure whether there is anyone in the hall who remembers better, but I think for the 2000 Biennale, it was also remarkable that in 1999, Peter Pere had been displaying work at the Arts Biennale, so probably this was also something that guided our local architecture association's focus on the relevance to be officially present at the Architecture Biennales as well. But yeah, overall the format was the same, really open for young creatives. Anders Herm and Thomas Meister, who created the first ones, were around 23 years old, as actually also I was when I curated 14 years later. And the platform has been really exploratory, both in making the best benefit out of not having a venue. The first exhibition took place in the Polish pavilion. Anders Herm tells it was probably a mistake because people's body memory still gave them the feeling that it was probably a Polish pavilion and they didn't have enough budget to cover the whole sign. But yeah, the explorations went on. Gaasitoru is definitely worth mentioning for taking over the public space in Giardini, and I think the rest of that I would leave for Johan to go in more detail to. But these pavilions were followed by the founding of our architecture center that took over the organization of the pavilions, and I feel maybe also try to institutionalize how it was done. I feel maybe a bit less risks were taken. Most of the exhibitions of this middle period happened in Arsenale, and maybe we're also looking a bit of common ground with architecture centers' main activities that were revolving around export of architecture and those other topics. Of course, still giving creative freedom to the curators, but putting a bit of a more institutional stamp on the exhibitions as well. And this led over to curators maybe breaking out of the thinking in the box of Arsenale, and I think it's a good example of how taking risks has actually put on us on the map, because Lev is here also mostly for noticing Weak Monument, Homestage, Let Me Warm You, and finding out that something interesting is going on in Estonia as this maybe a bit more around the corner trickster approach to architecture biennales is something that can be, how to say, also beneficial to be noticed. I put this image here because I thought we should also think or talk about the elephant in the room. I know Lev is going to talk about another elephant, Tony, but I'm going to talk about this one. It's an elephant on Viru Street, and it was displayed at our exhibition in 2014. In 2014, the biennales extended their length from 3 months to 6 months. And for a country like Estonia, where curatorial competitions announced that the project should be done for 30,000 euros at a time, it was a huge pressure on the budget, because the main reason to extend the period was for the Biennale to earn more from national representations, but it put even more pressure on the curators to get their work done for basically no salary and no guarantees and no production and communication support, because the funding had to be put in just renting the space to even be present. And I think I'm not the only one in the room who has been involved with several exhibitions within a 10-year period, realizing that the problems are still the same, with the budgets just dissolving, the support being quite minimal, and the whole responsibility lying on the shoulders of curators. that's why last year we also took the decision to produce it from the side of Cultural Ministry. When previously, over a 10-year period, the average budget of the pavilions had been all in all 70,000 euros, we managed to bring it 3 to 4 times higher. With actually this same starting point. And I think this also proves that with huge motivation on the production side, you can really bring the projects to unexpected levels. And those 170 media coverages, including Forbes, The Guardian, Bloomberg, and other publications that we couldn't have even had in mind, also sort of prove that the effort was really worth it. So I think we have had a bit uneven and unstable past, but I think we have also done several things right. And I put this pavilion picture of Czechoslovakia here because some 7 or 8 years ago, I think a tree fell on the roof of their pavilion. And pretty much since then, neither of them has participated in the Biennale. There has been always a sign that it's under construction, while they actually just haven't figured out which one of the countries should renovate it. And I think finally they managed to do it now, and they're back at the Biennale. But last year, discussing with one Slovakian architect how amazing it seems to her that we are present without having, any preconditions or anything given to us, and always finding interesting venues, having the open calls, creating this also sort of new generations of architects by always using our students as guards who show people around in the pavilion. It's something that is remarkable. And I feel that even though the organizational side has been quite full of turbulent times, we have also shown that even despite those issues, we can be successfully present there, and we can be successfully present there even with experimenting with the formats. This is a picture of Neeme Külm and Tenes Varkas. I think Neeme is also somewhere in this hall. And I put this picture in the presentation because this is Neeme mantling Let Me Warm You last year. But Neeme also curated Gas Pipe, that is considered to be the most successful exhibition Estonia has had at the Architecture Biennale. And Tenes Varkas on the left has curated another exhibition at the Arts Biennale. And I think only we have that kind of rare community to hold with care, where head curators of previous biennales are the ones helping to really put up the new pavilions. And I think this is something we should really hold with care. And this is also what we should keep in mind going forward. I guess there might be some fear maybe up about the procurement that we just announced, looking for a new organizer. But my main point to say is that I think it should be organized by someone who handles it with the same care. And I think our ecosystem is mature enough to play around with new formats and not just stick to the safest possible one. Johan is going to hate me for this picture, but I just wanted to finish with 2 slides of us doing basically all of it beside a kitchen table, and the project of last year having a production communication team behind every part of the project to really bring the relevance and the attention that the curators deserve. And as a finishing slide, there is a scene from Summertime, 1955, when people are discussing whether they should go to see the Biennale or not, just to give some idea of what relevance an event can actually have in architecture without having any physical objects remaining, but having some love for architecture and art brought together every year in Venice. Thank you.
Aitäh sulle, Johanna. Thank you so much for this introduction to create some context around the biennial and its story, so could say. So do we have any questions maybe from the hall, or are we moving on?
Let me see how's the timing.
What time is it?
We can keep the questions for the panel, but if in case there is some relevant questions, maybe one or two could be also taken now.
One or two quick questions if there is, but if there's none, then we can just move on, I think.
So let's give the floor to Lev then.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you again, Johanna. Yeah, clap, clap. Like I said, it was a keynote to the keynote. Our main presentation is coming from, partly from Canada, but today from London, straight from London, from halfway to Canada. Like Johanna said, experimenting with formats, it's not necessarily a risk. And Lev Bratishenko is a curator and a critic. And we are extremely excited to hear your thoughts, who the biennial is actually targeted to and how we should move forward from this point here.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? I don't know if I should move this. It's okay? Sometimes I get excited. I speak too fast, so just stop me. But I just want to say thank you so much, Johanna. And I think it's really amazing what you're doing. I've been already telling people in the community in London and also in Canada, like every country should have conversations like this in public. It's a really important thing to do. And also just to say, you know, I'm here because as I've met Johanna this last summer and I've enjoyed many of the Estonian pavilions, and basically I reached out to her online and said, hey, why are you so good? Like, how do you keep doing it again and again and again? So that's what started the conversation. Whenever we enter into some situation, whether it's you know, a bathroom or a dinner party or a biennale, we usually kind of accept its rules. You know? We sort of go along with it and we act accordingly. And this is just sort of human and polite, a sociable instinct. I think no one will deny it's good. But this habit of naturalizing situations of historical contingency has a risk. It can kind of limit our actions to variations. So I thought that for today's discussion about ways of participating in Venice, it could be useful to remind myself of its history. To analyze or critique the Biennale just on the basis of its curatorial choices or what it says it's about, its declarations of intent, can be to ignore many things. The ideologies, the historical, political, economic contexts, and just the many plain accidents, actually, that produce these kind of things. Old motivations can live on in contemporary structures. I hope this thing works. Once you pull on the thread of history, though, there's a risk. You could follow it back all the way to the beginning of time. So let me just say that the Art Biennale emerged. As Johanna also mentioned, it emerged out of the vast international expositions, monster celebrations of the new logistical and industrial capacity of the 19th century. And those themselves developed out of the national trade fairs and even parades of imperial loot of the 18th century. The Biennale came into being as a trade-specific miniature and a reaction to those, focusing on art while keeping the prizes and the medals and all these things that reliably provoked excitement at the historical fairs. You can see the prominence of the prize money on the very first poster. So 1893 was the 25th anniversary of this happy Italian royal marriage, and Venice wanted to make a distinctive Venetian contribution to this national celebration. If you remember that this city-state had resisted Rome's authority for 500 years until it was finally humiliated by Napoleon. So Venice had a strong motivation to make a kind of ostentatiously international gesture as this former portal to the world, to both flatter the king, but also remind the country of its special international prominence. And so the original plan for this event had two parts. We've sort of forgotten the first part. It was to build an orphanage for the sons of shipwrecked sailors, and then also host a national biennial exhibition of art. So the history of the Venice Biennial is a history of many unresolved tensions. And I see one here from the conception. The material social benefit, the orphanage, versus cultural propaganda versus art market. And the exhibition was initially divided into three categories. Invited Italian and international artists, 150 each, so 300 total, and a jury to select up to 50 works submitted by others. So a fundamental constant of this early Biennale is massive Italian coverage, over 40%, but surrounded by international participants. So this showed a very kind of canny understanding of tourism basics. Foreign artists are included as an inducement, as a cookie, to encourage foreign visitors. And here's the tension between publicness and publicity, culture and economic tourism, Venetians versus international jet set, although they traveled by boat at the time. The site is, again, Napoleon's fault. After he liberated the world's oldest republic in 1797, you can see some loot being taken away from Venice on the left. After this, the French cleared an area at the eastern end of the island. It used to be fields, churchyards, and expanded it by reclaiming some land from the lagoon and making a public garden, the Giardini. It only has one canal, a relatively hidden canal, and it's been called the most Roman-looking part of Venice. Here's the elephant you were promised. So at the time of the founding of the Biennale, children could ride an elephant here. He was called Tony. And reclaiming this territory for Italy in this national celebration, the Biennale removes it in a way from Venice. And here's the tension between public and private use and competing sources of urban power. The biennial, as many biennials are, as a kind of art washing for urban renewal projects. And this tension between the social and spatial estrangement of the Biennale from the rest of Venice and Venetians has never stopped being discussed, never stopped being a sort of generative sore spot. In this talk, I'm going to interrupt myself 6 times with pavilion projects that I think trigger the tensions I'm describing. So here's the first one. 2010. The British Pavilion starts with the long history of British literary and artistic obsession with Venice. But their goal was, quote, to try out strategies of breaching the Giardini fence, to reach out. And it included recreating a mini lagoon ecosystem, displaying local birds, you can see in the back, taxidermied birds for little John Ruskins to sketch. All of this while sitting in a 1:10 model of the 2012 London Olympic Stadium. And this was called the Stadium of Close Looking. You can see the drawing inset. But I'm more interested in what they tried to do with this structure of the stadium after the Biennale. Because they had been hosting workshops and things, they had relationships with schools in particular. And so a school in Giudecca, across the water to the south, had agreed to take the structure, rebuild it, and use it in the school. So after the Biennale, it was transported there, and there were some bureaucratic delays, obstacles, and these kind of continued for almost 2 years until finally the pavilion curators back in London receive an official request saying, get this pile out of our schoolyard. Another Venetian organization offers a different site, far on the other side of the island near the port. And here there was already a community center and a museum. A museum of traditional boat building. So it had a sort of a new context. So they move the pile there, they start talking about where it can be rebuilt. And then the port actually evicts that museum. So they lose their context that would have made the stadium structure appropriate. They find a third site, it also falls through. And finally, the pile of materials ends up being sort of looted and all the metal components are stolen. And they kind of say, okay, well, this isn't going to happen. They donate the wood as sort of raw materials. I thought it was quite interesting. They even published a booklet about the experience. And I don't include this story to make Venetians appear ungrateful or to criticize the pavilion organizers. I think it's important to think of it as an honorable attempt to do something. The Central Pavilion, or back to 1900, let's say, the Central Pavilion hosted the entire exhibition until 1905. There were some regional halls that were added in 1901, and these kind of inspired the origin of the national pavilions, which were gradually built by countries in a variety of sort of self-images frozen in time. Frivolous, meticulous, folkloric, neoclassical, international sort of modernist styles, doomed from the moment they were finished to be anachronistic, but still useful. Belgium was first in 1907. We know where they got the money. Austro-Hungary, Britain, Germany in 1909, Sweden and France in 1912, Russia in 1914. The years tell you that this was, acts also of soft power rivalry at a time of increasing, European tensions. But this was also a practical strategy. It was a way to reclaim some of the power of selection from the Italian organizers. The French pavilion, for example, was inaugurated by a solo exhibition of Rodin. And this is also, I think, the beginning of a race to a kind of impossible comprehensiveness, where every country ought to have its pavilion in the Giardini like its little desk at the UN. And every nation can make its pilgrimage to Venice in search of legitimization, the central institutions sort of sanctioning the periphery, allowing it to be subsumed into the canon. Okay, this is a poster from the 20th century, but this is about the Canadian Pavilion of 2016. The Canadian Pavilion this year was narrating the importance of natural resource extraction to the country's history and current economy. And this is something that's still kind of repressed in the Canadian self-image. We really prefer to think of ourselves as very green and very good, especially compared to the shit show in the South. In the end, though, the story about kind of extraction was kind of too spicy a meal for the Canadian commissioner. So the government came up with this really perfect bureaucratic excuse. They said, "Oh, we're so sorry, we actually have to renovate the building immediately. You can't use it." But not because we don't like your project. So somehow, the team of Canadian curators, I wasn't involved, by the way, I'm just a fan, convinced the Giardini, convinced the Italians to do the project outside of the Canadian Pavilion on the grounds of the Giardini. So this is a kind of a map showing the relationship to the nearby buildings. So because the history of Canadian resource extraction follows colonial relationships, suddenly the placement near the British and the French pavilions becomes potent in new ways. Today, about 75% of the world's mining and prospecting companies are headquartered in Canada. And so national pavilions like this become something like a map of the world, and you can use it to make a visual argument. The pavilion becomes a cartographic intervention. And what the Canadian curators did is they designed this circular platform in the section on the right, very shallow kind of hole, essentially. And below the platform was a tiny, tiny screen showing 800 seconds of history of natural resource extraction, 800 years over 800 seconds. But you could only see this little film by looking through this gold survey stake you can see on the, being tested on the left. So you had to get really close to it. You had to sort of lie down on the ground or kneel. And accessing this exhibition this way forces visitors into a kind of humbling posture. And you could say that the entire project was an excuse, a kind of dramaturgy to create this single image, which is the Canadian ambassador to Italy bowing to the British pavilion. So they used the kind of rules and norms of Venice to make a puppet show with some very powerful people. And not everybody likes it. Back to the early 20th century. Originally, exhibitions were all in the salon style, as Johanna mentioned. Artists only showed one or two works. One man, and they were men, shows took over around the First World War. But staying constant through this evolution, the Biennale was functioning just like the previous international expositions and world fairs. This was a machine for seeing, and particularly an occasion for critics to make a special analytical effort. Baudelaire famously wrote about the Exposition Universelle in Paris in 1855, quote, "There can be few occupations so interesting, so attractive to the critic as a comparison of the nations and their respective products." So you have this regular moment of synthesis and data gathering, that's a term they used even in the 60s, was also a display of evidence that the divine wellsprings of the masters had not dried up. So it was a sort of regular proof that European art was as good as it ever had been, and a recurring opportunity to see the world through thick samples of artistic activity, as well as, I think, a fairly insane claim to represent the global state of art, of anything. So this tension between leading culture and accurately reflecting it like a mirror will become a crisis in the 60s. A major turning point was when the king and Mussolini legally separated the responsibilities of the city and the biennial corporation in 1928. In exchange for the buildings, the Biennale got to keep all the ticket sales and commissions on art and book sales. And in the 30s, the fascist government's increasing nationalism had a sort of side effect of encouraging the Biennale to diversify, so as a way to increase foreign participation. And you briefly had music Biennale, poetry, and cinema, which was the big success. Post-war geopolitical shifts caused a kind of turning back, a sort of conservatism to the origins of the Biennale, really focusing on offering artists, especially European artists, an international picture, giving them a chance to compare different international art movements. Basically, by the 60s, the Art Biennale has taken on most of its contemporary characteristics, and most of the tensions that are familiar to us, and certainly familiar to anyone who goes regularly, were established and named and debated. If you ever attended the opening days, you'll recognize this description by a journalist from 1962, quote, "part vernissage, part horse race." So you have the tension over the Biennale as a party, as decadent and elitist. The same journalist wrote, "If you visit on the day it opens to the public, it feels as if it has just closed." 68. The student protests at the Biennale of 68 were blamed on foreigners, but actually led by local students who had been demonstrating long before the Biennale had opened. But the Biennale was attacked especially because of its failure to take kind of responsibility as a public institution. It was finally named as contaminated. Contaminated by alignment with oppressive power and representing the culture of a specific class. The Biennale of the bosses, it was called, or the Biennale of the police. One student pamphlet called it, in typical Italian clarity, a key moment concretizing the mechanism of repression and mystification of the culture of the bosses. So police repression produced this sort of extravagant, exaggerated sense of risk. A few pavilions were occupied. You can see here artworks have been turned around and graffitied. Some artists pulled out, more just issued declarations of support. So despite a really clear kind of flexibility in its structure and its organizing, which had continued to produce the Biennale through all the upheavals of the first half of the 20th century, in 68 it seemed discredited. The famous Italian art critic Germano Celent famously called the 1968 Biennale a 19th century ferry that sails indifferently on the waters of the May Revolution. And I thought it was quite interesting that there's a roundtable conference that was organized in 68, not by the Biennale, but by academics and activists in Venice. And all of the proposals that were submitted and discussed wanted to eliminate the national pavilions. Some for different reasons, but let's say some were in favor of a kind of conceptual unity. Others wanted to be able to finally offer a kind of a complete, perfect UN outline of all the countries. Others wanted more spatial freedom than these rigid structures would allow. So on the topic of spatial freedom, this is 2016, the Uruguayan pavilion that year. They opened it with a press release saying, "We've discovered a hidden tunnel under our building, and it's full of thousands of objects collected from other pavilions, enough to fill a whole different exhibition." And then they proceeded to make this true. So you encountered the pavilion this year not as a building first, but as these sort of spooky figures in identical green rain ponchos. And if you follow these anonymous disguised thieves to their origin, you arrive at a kind of clandestine headquarters. And there you too can borrow a poncho and join them. And if you do this, it comes with official instructions, which say, go and bring back an object from another pavilion, sort of liberate it. A construction tool from Canada, a tub of mayonnaise from Germany, whatever. And then when you returned it, these were carefully cataloged to form, the exhibition. And you'd be rewarded with a bag of dirt, supposedly from the tunnel. So you can see the sort of storage of the exhibition growing on the left and some ponchos ready to go on top. So being asked to help of course, is a completely ordinary act in regular life, but is very weird at the Biennale, and a theft also is sort of a shocking breaking of the rules. But all of this adds this new layer of sort of exaggerated rules, screams its absurdity, but it also kind of sensitizes the visitor to the rules all around them at the Biennale anyway, that we were sort of taking for granted and going along with. They're just as contrived, but they appear normal. So the pavilion ends up asking the question of how do you define the space of this pavilion, right? Is it a building with a hole, or does it extend in its potentiality to the entire Biennale beyond, sort of like the tentacles of a little parasite? So in 1968, critics, proclaimed the Biennale was dying. It was dying from both creative and spatial asphyxiation. And the result was also twofold, although not simultaneously. The creative response by about 1970 was that the Biennale finally proposed to take a thematic approach to the main exhibition. So this immediately caused a very interesting tension between the countries that liked a strict theme, they want to be told what to do, and those that wanted just suggestions, frameworks, values. And this second position, of course, is backed up by the legal extraterritoriality, the statutory sovereignty of the national pavilions that are treated like embassies. And this tension remains fundamental today. The thematic approach gave new prominence to the biennial director's curatorial responsibilities, but further reflection on the spatial problem, plus this enlarged curatorial role, equals the arrival of architecture in 1975. The architect Vittorio Gregotti agreed to curate the Art Biennale only if it included a small architecture exhibition. He saw architecture as a bridge, something that could kind of span the formalism of art and the political questions that had been prominent since '68. His Biennale would be more reflective of the people. Architects, we always think architecture is the solution. But they were still afraid of '68-style protests. So the Giardini were closed. They didn't reopen the Giardini, and the Biennale took place in these salt warehouses on the south side of the island, sort of facing Giudecca, which is important. One of Gregotti's goals that year was, quote, to use the Biennale as a tool to recuperate Venetian spaces, rehabilitate and renovate infrastructure. So he organized a competition of ideas that was open not only to architects, to repurpose this complex of flour mills and buildings called the Molino Stucchi in Giudecca. So deindustrialization in Venice gives architects the opportunity to kind of argue politics in public. Venice becomes a place to study problems. With a very highly strategic placement, a bit like facing the Giudecca with 1975, the 2023 Estonian Pavilion staged an Estonian problem in Venice. The curators quote, 30 years of post-Soviet turbo neoliberalism, the problem of financialized housing, or in their words, two-faced domesticity, homes as assets, commodities, investments. And this was staged for international analysis, like in '75, but I think also for mutual recognition, because of course this is not a problem just in Estonia. It's a problem everywhere. And it was resonant in the Biennale context in several ways, mostly because there is no domestic space, or even you could say normal space in Venice, right? Everything is displaced by display. So the casual, the messy, the domestic are absent. So inside this rented Venetian apartment, you have the tension between curated objects, artwork, and just stuff. Sort of maximum contrast between ordinary domesticity and elements that say, hey, this is not actually a home, despite what the sign says. Shelving that's also a spreadsheet with boxes labeled bills and boxes labeled dreams. A kitchen that's a database with all the objects marked with units of measurement. Bedrooms with beds labeled to keep track of who sleeps where. Mirrors even above a bed to more easily see the valuable canal view. And inhabitants, crucially, artists, people on display, some of the time. You didn't always know if you were watching a performance or just someone eating their lunch. Is this an artwork or someone forgot their socks? And this really, a bit like the Uruguayan Pavilion, for me, sensitized me to the rest of the Biennale. It made everything else feel different through this experience, kind of lifeless and cold afterwards. Back to '75. The architecture exhibition inside the art one that year was only covered by some specialist press. There was no special budget for architecture. Architects paid to be involved. Interviewed about 50 years later, Grigotti said, quote, "Before there were no problems with the public. The discussion was only among specialists. Today the pretension of the Biennale is to involve the people, not just architects or artists, and that's practically impossible." So we're talking about the tension between a pretension to mass appeal and the specialist reality, and this is common to all biennials, not just Venice. And as for improving, using the biennial as a tool to improve the city, its housing stock, its disused buildings, well, this building, the Molino Stucchi, has become an enormous Hilton. Yet the ambition to leave Venice better off than before the Biennale, to use the exhibition as a tool, persists. So 1980 is the year we usually date, the beginning of the Architecture Biennale. It's the year it's separated from the Art Biennale. After whatever it's been, 20 minutes of listening to me, I hope you don't wish I started here. 1980 also marked the biggest spatial shift since the opening of the National Pavilions, because the director, Paolo Portoghesi, called in a favor to the defense minister and said, hey, can you clean out some of this building? And so they got some of the tanks and ammunition out of the Corderie dell'Arsenale. And despite only getting part of it, this was 300 meters, over 300 meters of new space, and it was an expansion in the direction of Venice. So this huge new space allows a break with traditions of display towards life-size models. This is a slide by Charles Jenks at the opening of the famous Strada Novissima. Portoghesi claimed that his original idea was to make a model of a typical Italian street and to reveal how different architectural styles could just coexist harmoniously. And this was a specific argument for Italy at the time, an argument against the conformity that Portoghesi saw. But it became read as a gallery of architects' self-portraits. Each one got one section of facade. And also many of them were read as sort of pseudo-national pavilions, as architects were identified with their national scene. Gehry here, for example, was praised for showing, quote, the memory and essence of American architecture. I guess it's the balloon frame. Charles Jenks' design for the sort of altar at the end of this long sort of church, the Critics' Corner, also echoed the design of Aldo Rossi's famous Teatro del Mondo. You can see Jenks imagining it floating in, just like Rossi. Portoghesi blamed Jenks, who of course was the sort of pope of postmodernism, for how the Strada was misread. I spend a lot of time in the Jenks archive. I blame him for many things as well, but this accusation makes a lot of sense. It's easy to see how Portoghesi's argument against conformity was read as an argument for postmodernism as a style. Asked much later what he learned from the experience, Portoghesi said, I learned that it was difficult to be understood. I also learned that when something is successful, there's something wrong with it. Perhaps the problem lies in the promise of experiential scale. One-to-one models seem to offer an unmediated experience, and here I think is the first tension we can name that's unique to architectural exhibitions, between display and use, and in parallel between those publics that can easily interpret the codes of architectural display, the models and the drawings, and the direct communication of experience, which seems more egalitarian. Yet, very interestingly, the 1980 Biennale was criticized for using Cinecittà, so these scenographic workers from Rome, from the studios in Rome, to build the street, to kind of fake this street in paper and cardboard and plaster. So for being architecturally fake, it seems that believability is not enough, and the meaning of one-to-one experience apparently also depends on construction processes. Okay, last year's Estonian project was about the tension between well-meaning climate policy, this goal to insulate the entire country by 2050. Very weird explaining this to you, but anyway. And this tension between the mass climate policy and the quality of life or sociability. The scale of this project of renovation and insulation seems to require mass-produced solutions and limited democratic control. So efficiency trumps sociability for the sake of preserving our ecosystem. And in my reading of it, the pavilion asked, what if the way that renovation decisions are made is as or even more important than the thermal or carbon result? They really emphasized the kind of processes, all the dialogues and things through scripts, which were great to see. But by producing the sort of public evidence, by this exterior that spectacularly showed, what such a result could look like in Venice. And I don't really know if this was intended or not. Someone here can definitely tell me. They ended up questioning how all construction decisions are made. It pointed to the invisible and troubling processes that produced the Biennale, as well as architecture more broadly. By appearing to partially renovate a Venetian building, the project read as an accusation in reverse. Look, the Biennale can improve Venetian housing, so why doesn't it? If insulation can be a humanist act, if biennials can be acts of civic generosity, why aren't they? The strategic site also helped, since everybody going to the Giardini had to walk past. All of us knowing it's really hard to build or do anything kind of structural in Venice, so everyone wondering, how did they do that? How things are built matters. I think this point is so important that I'll return to it at the end. 1980, Rossi's delightful Teatro del Mondo, is on the left, and then his entry pavilion on the right, was many things. Partially a compromise to include Rossi because he refused to be on the Strada Novissima with everyone else. A gesture in plywood, but still a gesture towards producing architecture that could outlast the exhibition, and not least an exhibition about Rossi. Inside the Arsenale, the size and the concentration of this edition meant that the curator Portuguese could even force visitors to pass through a historical exhibition about a sort of forgotten Italian architect, Antonio Basile, in order to visit the Strada Novissima. So in 1980, the Architecture Biennale was much more kind of compressed. It had not yet swallowed the infrastructure of the art one. And these qualities are strongly related to this early spatial freedom, the concentration, and coherent curation. All of this suffers as the Architecture Biennale grew. So the theatrical success of the three-dimensional display had depended on this new Arsenale space. And this logic, I think, has largely been broken since. I think that the added space of the Arsenale quickly became a trap, too much that you had to fill. It's this image of, by James Sterling of his building in the Giardini. So the 1991 edition was the first that finally returned to the Giardini. And that year's director, Francesco Dalco, later explained his conception of the Biennale as, quote, "We had 330 meters of corridor to use and a budget of practically zero. So we came up with the idea of inviting schools of architecture." So he continued Portuguese's strategy of adding a historical lesson that you had to walk through, this time about a Greek, not an Italian architect. And because he was working through schools rather than the national governments directly, he was more directly involved in shaping the national pavilions. So 1991 was the first time the Architecture Biennale activated the national pavilions, and it was a direct result of financial pressures. Dalco even boasted about a solution, saying, "One of my big achievements was to convince foreign countries to invest money." His commission of the bookstore to James Sterling was an explicit echo of Rossi's Teatro, which of course arrived by boat. Sterling called this his boat ship. And this was a permanent addition to the Giardini, aligning with the 1991 Biennale's theme of education. It was about how an architect becomes an architect. So that year, schools brought students to live in Venice for about a month, and the corridor became, in Dalco's words, a giant laboratory. A few years ago, Leslie Loco's edition did something similar with her summer school. And we see here the tension between maybe refined aesthetics or constructing a convincing image of the global picture and experimentation and sociability in habitation. And this touches on the tension between speed and production, the hectic nature of making the Biennale, which urges efficiency, like insulating buildings, and the opportunity to produce a community, which takes patience and time on the ground talking to people. 2018. So from one perspective, you could say that the team of this year's Scottish Pavilion were completely, perfectly wrong for working in the normal conditions in Venice. All of the previous work had been based on kind of relationships with local organizations across Scotland. They use slow processes to support community-led change. So how can people like this work in a literally foreign context that's inherently transient? Financial constraints plus their strategy equals this site, which is on the opposite end of the island, about as far as you can be from the Giardini near the train station. And their budget only allowed them to rent a small building for a few weeks, a shed they called it, next to a private green space within the Palazzo Zenobio. So the photo is taken sort of from the shed. But once they were there, getting to know the neighbors and all that grass was in front of them, well, they kind of took it on. And they spent 4 months, a small team spent 4 months, making friends. And they called this, quote, producing a resource in the form of place, but also a resource in the form of people. And alongside this, they developed a design that they call an armature, so this drawing on the right of part of the structure. So kind of combining this austerity condition with strategy to produce a flexible, maybe simple even, but cheap, friendly, and movable set of wooden elements. And this physical and social structure was embraced by the neighborhood, the community in Dorso Duro. They used it for film screenings, meetings, music festival, classes for local schools. I was really impressed when a member of the Scottish team told me, we said if nobody from the Biennale comes, that's okay. But after the opening days, it was so popular that the Scottish government actually extended the lease, the original 7-week lease, until the end of the Biennale. And at the end, the armature was sold to the community for €1, sort of symbolically. I'm only sharing inspiring examples, I'm trying to be positive, but it's just too delicious that exactly at the same time in the Giardini, this was going on. So the UK pavilion, responding to the same theme, proposed to interpret the experience of being an island. So the inside was empty, which suggests a kind of, it's ready to be inhabited by someone. But of course, you could only be there if you had a ticket to the Giardini. And outside, they built this massive scaffolding supporting a structure made out of some very expensive and carefully finished plywoods. So they built a kind of temporary imperial panopticon with magnificent views over the Giardini in Venice. And it was all intended, in the curator's words, to suggest themes including abandonment, reconstruction, sanctuary, Brexit, isolation, colonialism, and climate change. It only hosted one event, a single night performance of The Tempest. So I do think it was a very successful exploration of the idea of abandonment. Since 1991, the fundamentals of the Architecture Biennale have not changed much. As Johanna mentioned, things like extending the duration from 3 to 6 months, but the context has changed much more. Digital media has made it even more ridiculous for biennials to claim to manifest global culture. Many persist, and I think perhaps that's because this claim invites a presumption that curators, people like me, have access to a world overview. And architecture curators have arguably come to have more of a stake in biennials than architects do. And this is the tension between discourse and practice, between showing and thinking and making. And it reflects the rise of a figure that was basically unknown at the time of the first Architecture Biennale. The architecture curator's role has become something like an alchemist, offering exposure in exchange for a moment of practice before it's transformed into myth. So from its origins in presenting a supposedly complete survey of contemporary art or architecture work, the Biennale has become a vehicle for the production of knowledge and debate. And where its success was once based on successfully defining a moment of being a good windsock, showing you where things were going or were, this tendency was already weakening before the internet killed it. Today, social media is the primary means by which the architectural now is understood and seen. And this has strengthened the role of biennials as mechanisms of status production and also as theaters for the staging of arguments. The overwhelming quantity of daily news, architectural news, feeds our hunger for polemical pavilions and polemical gestures. The 1980s curatorial turn, as it's been called, accelerated a shift to post-productive discourse within architecture, and this aligned with ascendant neoliberalism in society. I think today this swings the other way, unevenly as these shifts always do, but there was a growing concern about how we made our world so miserable, so cruel, a failure for most people, and murderous to many. The pavilion projects I've selected, I've shared, engage with some of the rules and norms of the Biennale, ignoring them, contradicting them to make a point. On one level, this makes them stand out. It's just a smart, successful, competitive strategy. On another level, I think this makes them all projects of governance, rule-breaking as rule-making. I maybe not the only person here that feels kind of overwhelmed by the amount of bad news we read every day. I'm also overwhelmed by the amount of critical thinking, especially in the kind of architectural curatorial space. I feel there's this flood of kind of research and critical scholarship, attempts to expand and redefine the field, add conceptual language, encourage architects to think differently. For example, to acknowledge the networks of harm that architecture is entangled with. This work has a limited impact on the world. This is fine. I mean, the work of thinking and showing is very important. But I think what we need are more places, more platforms to make differently and to make in public. Personally, the last Biennale was the most depressing I've ever attended, but it was interesting, the curator described it as a laboratory. And I think this conception is a dead end. It makes the Biennale really no different from the hundreds and maybe thousands of architectural labs in universities and in some practices all around the world. We don't need a bigger, better science fair. Instead of a laboratory, I want to propose the conception of the Biennale as something like a nunnery or a monastery. In the sense of, a group of people that come together, a community, because they've chosen to take on new responsibilities that no one else really thinks are necessary. So in this Biennale of nuns, the question becomes, if you can choose the rules to live by or make architecture by, which do you choose? To what ends? So Venice becomes the event where people come together to take on burdens that nobody asked them to do work that the world does not require, but that they believe could help. And because of its prominence and age, its infrastructure of frozen national pavilions, its contaminated soul, I think the Biennale has the potential to manifest hugely contrasting, self-chosen contexts for architectural production, and for this to be noticed. It's the most prominent environment we have in which architects could experiment on themselves, a place to take on responsibilities that don't exist in architectural real life, to do things that governments, the construction industry, the market, building codes, climate policy, or the Biennale don't ask anyone to do. Then, in the only setting where architecture could make all the rules artificial, to prove it can be made otherwise, not just displaying the final result, but showing the work. And this is what many projects already do, abandoning display, taking steps towards pavilions as temporary zones of liberated construction, of making evidence under self-defined conditions, where the making is as much the evidence as the evidence itself. Venice is already a place where we come together to think about rules, and I believe this is its future. I really hope this story will be useful for our discussions today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for this overwhelming presentation. Yeah, sky is the limit. And it seems to me that it's becoming ever more and more difficult to find something that hasn't been done before. But this is what we are here for. But now it's time to come a little bit closer to home. But before that, do we have any quick questions from the hall to Lev? Or are we keeping the questions to the panel time? Silence. Yeah, it's a lot to digest, I suppose. But coming closer to home now, maybe some direct experience as well from Finnish architect Kaisa Karvinen, who curated the Nordic Pavilion last year and is curating the Finnish pavilion next year. Is that correct? Yes. And her work primarily focuses on architectural exhibitions and academic research. So this should be very exciting and useful as well. Kaisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear my voice?
Very good.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Johanna, for invitation. It's really important event. Also, would be important to organize something like this in Helsinki too. So, my background is in architecture. I am architect, and then last 5 years I have been mostly working with curating, organizing exhibitions, but also events, summer schools, and then doing research. So that's why also Venice has been really close to my heart. And in this lecture, I will open up some processes from last years, more from maybe from the practical level. And also I'm really thinking that there is a need for sharing knowledge from the processes as they are long and heavy, and they also need a lot of resources, not only money but also human resources. So sharing some findings from my processes is my aim. And I will compare two processes and two exhibitions from the Venice, and the first one is from last year, the Nordic countries pavilion that I had the privilege to curate. It was a quite big exhibition from the point of view that it was produced by a museum, Architecture and Design Museum, Helsinki, in collaboration with Sweden's Archdes Museum and also National Museum from Norway. And as it was also specific in that sense that it was developed together with the performance artist and with the team from the performance art field. And I will also open up what does it mean when you invite a performance art group to the Architecture Biennale. And then I will also share something from next year's Biennale and next year's Pavilion of Finland, and what kind of changes actually we are doing to the process and what we aim to do in that exhibition. Nordic countries pavilion is specific in that sense that it is shared between Finland, Norway and Sweden. And each year, some of these countries are responsible for the exhibition production. And last year, Industry Muscle 5 Scores for Architecture, it was produced by the Architecture and Design Museum, and in collaboration with the Archdes and National Museum. And what does it mean in practical level is that we have meetings once in 2 months, and we share what we have been thinking and what we are planning to do. And also in a budget-wise, other museums are contributing to the exhibition process. And in that sense, also, when we have some ideas, also curators from other museums are criticizing or commenting or discussing, debating our ideas. And actually, that part of the process has been really helpful for me as a curator. So creating this kind of a circle of commentators or those who are supporting and also know the discussion field has been really important. And then, of course, the Ministry of Education has been the main source of money. I think also maybe it's because of my background in architecture. I look at exhibition also something that are really highly site-specific, and in our case, in the Nordic countries pavilion, in that exhibition, the Sverrefens pavilion was our starting point. It's open exhibition space. It's really bright, so there is a roof that gives the light in, and also it's made out of concrete, and it's this kind of a canonical work of modernistic architecture. And that was a starting point also for our exhibition. And I also want to share how the artist was selected. So as I was working at the time at the museum as a curator, I was selected to be the curator, and then with our museum team, we defined the process for selecting the artist. And it followed this kind of a 3-step process, so that we were doing a research about possible artists who are not actually architects, but have been working with material cultures or built environment, or have been interested in, for example, ecological questions in a way that would be relevant also for the architecture field. And based on that research, we commissioned 3 artists to do a proposal. And I wrote a curatorial concept, one A4 letter, where I defined some kind of starting points for the artwork and for the exhibition. And then these artists responded to this curatorial invitation in a way. And these proposals were showed to the group of international architects, and they didn't do the selection of the artists, but they wrote really good and long descriptions what they found out in the proposals. And based on those concepts and those texts, our museum directors of our museums selected artists. So in that way, it was not me and it was not the museum, but it was not also the International Advisory Board who did the selection, but it was like a kind of collective process. And in the end, we had the performance artist in the Architecture Biennale. And based on this proposal that Teo did, Teo Alaruona is a performance artist. We defined, in a one-year process, we defined this exhibition, Industry Muscle, 5 Scores for Architecture. And as Teo is coming from the performance art field, also the exhibition process was defined in the way as performance artist works. So it was not our architecture exhibition in that sense that we would actually select the content at first and then put them into space, but actually there was a director, and then there was a dramaturg, then there was a spatial designer, and as an exhibition would be a performance art, we did the exhibition. And from that point, Teo started to think about if we would look the Sverrefens pavilion, this Nordic countries pavilion made out of concrete, from the perspective of the performance art, from the perspective of body, from the perspective of time and space, how they are seen throughout the performance art, what kind of exhibition we would have. And of course, as it's concrete and as it's modernistic, this kind of contrast between the body and modernistic concrete architecture became really core point of the exhibition. And I wanted to give as much space as possible for the Teo's artistic practice. And here Teo is defining the core of the exhibition. Industry Muscle proposes an architecture grounded in my artistic practice and experience both as a trans person and as a performance artist who uses the body as a tool for research. The work explores how conceptions of the body have been shaped by fossil culture within modern architecture. And as Teo has been working with the issues related to the gender and body and also the material culture, actually we started to look at the building from the perspective of trans body and how also modernistic architecture is proposing this kind of binary gender norms. And in that way, we kind of continued working with the exhibition. And it became this kind of a group of installations. We wrote some kind of a manifesto for the exhibition, and each section of the manifesto had its own installation. So we have a sports car, which is kind of symbol of fossil fuel culture. There is some concrete building, and then there is a stage, and then there is a drawing in the window. And these were also taken from Finland to Venice. And as I said, we wrote, throughout the year, we were reading a lot of theory about modernistic architecture and about Sverrefens design principles. And we were constantly having a dialogue with the trans theory and with those kind of questions that Teo has been working throughout the years, and then putting those Teo's artistic practice and then the theory behind the Sverrefens pavilion together. And while doing that, we came up with this kind of 5 scores. Scores are in the performance art. They are some kind of tasks or prompts that the performance artist gives to themselves. And they are some kind of a manifesto. It can relate to for example, 5 points of architecture or something like similar. And the headlines of them are impurity, decategorization, performance, technobody, and reuse. And those were kind of suggestions for the future architecture, how we should approach modernistic architecture in the future, as it's all around us still. And as we had the group of artists who came from the performance art field, we had also a stage designer. And as one of those points of the manifesto was the reuse, we used only materials that were already used. So we recycled a lot of material. Here in the front of the picture, we have a stage, which is covered from the facade tiles of Finlandia Hall. So we were trying to collect a lot of materials around Helsinki, and we had a huge storage space in a concrete factory close to Helsinki, where we were slowly building these elements to the exhibition. And then we took those elements throughout the Europe to Venice. And here is one of the installation parts. There is this kind of a line, and it's approximately in the height of this, and you can measure if you were kind of fitting to the dimensions of the Corbusier's modular man. So it's on the eye level of the modular man, the line you can see here. And as Theo was and is still a performance artist, we also wanted to include performance as part of the exhibition. And this performance, it was 2 hours long, and it was presented during the opening days. And there we had, of course, also other performers. So we had Kid Kokko, Caroline Sinner, and Romeo Roxman-Gatt who were performing. We had the musician and dramaturg. And in the performance, those 5 scores, those 5 points in the manifesto, they were represented in the space. And they were putting their own bodies next to the modernistic architecture, next to the modernistic elements of a space, and then at the same time questioning its norms, but also at the same time taking them as their own, into their own bodies, and defining the norms again. And you can see the kind of scale figures in the installation, how they are measuring their bodies next to the element of the installation and of the exhibition. And also you can see the kind of when the size of the pavilion is so big, so actually you kind of lose the sense of the dimension. So giving some scale human there is a way of doing it visible. And of course, when we talk about architecture, it's not only about the connection between the body and then the human body and then the architecture, but also the bodies next to each others, and how they are, how the architecture is supporting to be together, how we are actually sitting now in this space, and what is, when you are in Venice, you are actually really visible, what kind of visibility is kind of recommended and supported. And of course, as I was also working at the museum and also working as a curator, you need to kind of measure the success in a way. And as you are not selling tickets in Venice, the most kind of simple way of measuring the success is kind of measuring the visibility. And in Venice, it's usually so that you get a lot of attention as so much journalists are there, and also yes, also the country, the journalists from Finland, they are interested what is how the country is represented. But for me, as the exhibition was also about human rights, it was about the questions related to the gender norms, it was questions about the bodies and about the architecture. It was actually really, really important, and it felt really meaningful that some of the journalists kind of made the effort. They took the time to get to get to know the exhibition really well, and they wrote really long articles about the topic and about the background of the exhibition. And in that way, we also were able to engage in discussions on important and topical questions. And here are some outcomes. Okay, and now for the future, what we are expecting next year. We are now working with Arkinfo, which is a bit smaller team. We are working with the exhibition for the Finnish Pavilion of Finland, designed by Alvar Aalto. And it's the 5th time when Arkinfo is working as a commissioner for the Biennale Arhitektuura. And you can see here, it's a wooden structure, and it was meant to be temporal, so that it would be disappeared after few exhibitions after it was built, but it's still there, and we are still making exhibitions into this Alvar Aalto pavilion. And as it's smaller space, it also gives a different kind of atmosphere for the exhibition. You can actually close it, you can make it dark, or you can make it something that people can, like only small amount of people can go inside it. And actually this kind of a difference in the space actually makes Venice a really different place to organize an exhibition for me. And as the working group is smaller, it's also the discussions around the exhibition making are really different. And I have been trying to actually now focus on the collective project planning in the way that actually everyone in the team would feel that they are doing the exhibition and that they know what are the discussions, what are the selections and decisions around the exhibition. And focusing on that as a curator has been really important for me this year. And also, as every year in the Finnish pavilion, in the Pavilion of Finland, it has been so usually that it's always the new curator who starts from the scratch. So this year I will be doing a lot of memos and write down the process in the way that the future curators would have a bit more knowledge or a bit more starting points for their work. And then I collected some practical findings from these 2 projects and from these two exhibition examples that might be interesting or useful for you also. So if I compare Finnish pavilion or the Pavilion of Finland and Nordic pavilion, I can say that the exhibition, as we all know, it's highly site-specific. So as Estonia doesn't have the pavilion as the Finland does, I think it's a huge possibility to choose the pavilion at the time. And at the same time, when you are working on your own exhibition, you tend to forget that actually it's not the only exhibition that is there, but it's actually 200 exhibitions at the time. And having a dialogue with other exhibitions and how does it relate to the other exhibitions, it's actually one of the main parts of the Venice as a space, as an exhibition context. And the timetables and productions are really specific if you compare to the museum exhibitions, of course. And then in Finland, we have been a lot discussing not only the funding structure and is it from the perspective of resources and money, is it good to organize the Venice exhibition, but also from the perspective of sustainability, as it's so ecologically heavy to travel there. Also taking the elements, the art elements there is really heavy process. So also that has been a really actually big discussion and struggle in Finland. And of course, as we are now having the discussions around, for example, Russian pavilion and Israeli pavilion, should we have them in Venice Biennale? Of course, the Biennale organization imposes not only practical constraints like related to the exhibition construction, but also as a political space. And as it was mentioned, I would say that nowadays media, social media especially, is the central arena of the Venice Biennale. And I would say that especially when you come from the small country, it's a place, Venice is a place to have this international discussion, like and colleagues, you are meeting the colleagues there, other institutions from the field of architecture. And especially the opening week, you meet the colleagues, but also the international media. And as it's still, I think, the most important forum for architecture discussions, and maybe it can be also experimental. And when it's at best, it can include critical awareness of the world's greatest global challenges, and as the national pavilion are some kind of representation of national countries, of course, geopolitical questions are always there. And as it was raised, this question, as Johanna was asking me what to do for Venice in the future, so I started to think this what if question, that if we didn't participate in the Venice, where would we have this kind of discussions and about architecture, and would there be actually some kind of alternative for Venice, and is there any place for Finland or Estonia to have these discussions, and what would be the other options? So if we are thinking not to participate Venice, what would be the other places to have those discussions? Thank you.
Thank you, Kaisa. Kas meil on saalist äkki nüüd küsimusi, sest Kaisa ei ole meil ka paneelis, et praegu on tegelikult see võimalus, since you are not participating in the panel, maybe it would be a perfect timing for now to ask a few questions if there is any. Just raise your hand, yeah. Ma annan mikrofoni ka, sest et meil ju on kaamerad siin.
Thank you for your presentation, Karl Taglige, architectural historian and critic. I'm interested in the general perception of the Finnish architecture audience, let's say the public of who's interested in architecture. Is there a consensus that Venice and the attendance there with a Finnish pavilion is important, and it is something that is worth investing in, both in terms of time and intellectual effort, but also of finances? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think it is, I think Miina can also answer, but I think it's seen important, definitely. I think the work behind it, so as how much does it need human resources, how much does it need money, I think it's another question. So actually, I think having enough resources to do the exhibition, it's always on like questionable, or it's not sure every year. So we get funding a bit less than we are, so that we would be able to do the exhibition. I think it's another thing that as we have two pavilions, basically. We have the Nordic countries pavilion every 6 years, and then we have the pavilion of Finland, Aalto pavilion, every year when it's the architecture exhibition year. So I think the also dynamic between those two pavilions is under question. Yes.
And we have one more question here and one more there.
Thank you. I'm presenting after you,
Yes.
kind of summing up all the Estonian participations. And actually it got me thinking as well, if we would not have participated, or if we would stop participating, do you have an answer to that? What would Finland do? Where would they turn?
I have to say that I have background in this kind of grassroots organizing activities. I have been organizing a lot of seminars, summer schools, and those kind of things. And actually, when you don't have a network of colleagues, when you don't have the network of institutions, actually inviting, the act of inviting becomes a bit difficult. So when we want to actually discuss with others, when we have the platform, Venice, actually you can focus on the topics in a way a bit more. But actually, if we wouldn't participate Venice, then we should collect other countries that are not also participating or who would be interested to do something else. So I don't mean that we cannot do it alone, I mean. So it's not something that you just leave out, because then you just leave the discussions also behind you.
This is actually happening like a competition to the Olympic Games or for Eurovision Song Contest. Some countries are trying to do something who are not participating.
Yeah.
But we have one more question.
Thank you. Or actually, I was following up on the first question, and I'm Miina Jutila from ArcInfo, so we are the commissioning body of the Finnish national presentation in Venice. And for the question about the Finnish architecture field, that how do they feel about the Finnish participation in the Biennale? As Kaisa mentioned, I think in general it is, of course, it is very well esteemed and important, but since Finland is so far away, even further than Estonia from Venice, it is quite exclusive, well, closer than Canada though, but it is quite exclusive to go to Venice, so not so many Finnish architects see the exhibition, so we think that it is really important, and we try to develop each time some ways to have participation in Finland or online, or something that can be brought back to Finland also from Venice.
Aitäh selle kommentaari eest. Thank you for the comment.
Thanks. Just because you're not on the panel, I would have asked you then. No, because of the ecological theme of the last one, this is a question I would ask many pavilion curators. But how did you did you feel a tension, or did you kind of debate this inside between an ecological theme and somehow moving, like the carbon and the energy of moving so much steel, marble, this long distance? How did you kind of deal with that?
I think it's this kind of an contradiction, or this kind of an friction in the exhibition was something that we felt really dear to us. Actually bringing a sports car, what was dressed not anymore in the use, and also bringing actually concrete slabs from Finland. But also, like, not only that, but also kind of criticizing architecture, but then using the aesthetics from the modernistic architecture in the exhibition design. So I think it's kind of, we wanted to, in a way, stay with the trouble and be with the topic in the sense that it becomes visible in the exhibition also as a practice, not being so that we would say that this is ecological or green, but actually bring the kind of feeling of guilty, or this kind of uncomfort zone in a way to the exhibition space was something that our approach, like, and bring those topics not as something that we say, but something also that you can feel it as an aesthetical effect. Yeah, that was something that we were aiming while doing the exhibition.
So I think that completes the questions for the moment. Thank you so much, Kaisa, for this presentation, and also for the good answers to all the questions. But now let's get some even more direct experience from Estonia, because Johan Tali is next up. He has curated 2 Estonian pavilions, and it would be interesting to hear a bit about the past, but also about the added value gained from the participations. So the microphone is yours. And then we are on for a break.
Hello. My both parents are artists, and actually I grew up going to Venice Biennale. Not always, but it was always something that was there as a kind of important moment. So basically, Johanna gave me the task today to kind of introduce you a brief history of Estonian participations. But I would like to start a bit before. We were starting to go to the Biennale 2000, was it? Yes. With this image and a kind of concept of checkers or chess. By looking at all the different expositions that we had, I've come to an understanding there's kind of two kind of types of exhibitions. One of them is playing checkers, and the other one is playing chess. They use the same board, but they kind of play a bit of a different game. And to kind of reference back to it, we'll also go to that very same image on the cover of Casabella. It's a graphic print by Leonhard Lapin from '86, entitled what's it called? Century of Estonian Architecture in Chess. So chess, what does chess mean in terms of an exhibition? Actually, while sitting here, I come to an understanding this print itself is an exhibition of architecture. And it's showing significant pieces of Estonian architecture placed as kind of chess pieces onto a playing board. These are all, actually not all of them are built works, but most of them found their way to kind of Estonian, the history of Estonian architecture. Why this is important to kind of note or to start from, okay, the chess is displaying architecture. Checkers has a completely different set of... sorry. Okay, so checkers doesn't have different pieces. There's no hierarchy in what is on display, but it's more about the game itself and how it's being played. And I would argue that all the expositions tend to lean towards one strategy or the other to a certain degree. But the prologue that kind of preceded the time when we started to go into the Biennales roughly starts with the re-independence of Estonia in the beginning of the 90s. And before that, even, there was a kind of generation of paper architects that used the exhibition format in their, to kind of show their ideas and their works as in opposition to kind of established architects that were actually doing the buildings in the Soviet time. So the kind of discourse of, also Johanna mentioned this, the discourse of kind of putting architecture not as a building that is supposed to be erected, but as an idea that should be exhibited, has its roots in Estonia and somewhat in that time. So in the 90s, this generation already was quite established, starting to build, and then actually something that maybe also ties back to Finland. This generation started to host here in Tallinn something that was called the Nordic and Baltic Architecture Triennial. And this was kind of a local attempt to bring together all the different nations to discuss architecture in our little small Estonia. Actually, what is funny, this is one of the few pictures I could find quickly a few days ago on the internet. It's actually showing the Finnish exposition. And on display, what I can decipher is bear skins clad onto boxes. I don't really know the context of this exhibition. Maybe someone in the room knows. But this basically was a kind of Estonian version of a Biennale at the time. Finland participated, so did Latvia, and all the kind of close countries nearby as well. And the other important thing to kind of consider is that this was a moment where local practitioners really wanted to reach out to the outside world and to kind of, first of all, to get inspiration and to get kind of architecture of the world inside, but also to kind of bridge out towards the outside. And I found a picture of Aldo van Eyck as a special guest at one of the Triennales. So there was a culture of trying to kind of also show and discuss architecture here, but also an interest to kind of bridge out and go to Venice. And this was also a time when the Estonian Architects Association was kind of reformed from a kind of Soviet institution to an independent Estonian institution. And actually a lot of things were already being built by Estonian architects. So there was a kind of free market economy, asked for a bit of different buildings. New architecture was coming up, bank buildings, shopping malls, things that probably were not that prominent during Soviet time, but were already considered new Estonian architecture. And actually, as the first Biennale, that was, it should come back, but I mean, yeah. Why am I missing a slide here? The first Biennale was organized by the Estonian Association of Architects with the kind of underpinning that it was actually time for Estonia now to really show Estonian architecture to the outside world, that it was almost 20 years later. A lot of things already were built. No, wait. I can't show the first slide of the actual exhibition. So the first competition was organized by the Estonian Architects Association and won by young curators, Anders Härm and Tarmo Maiste, with a project called Simulacrum City. And not much is actually publicly available about the exhibition. A bit of it is hearsay and kind of recollections of what was on display. So the Architects Union, in a way, got what they wanted because there was one of the invited artists was a photographer, Arne Maasik, who at that time was the kind of hottest guy to shoot all the new buildings that were being built. But at the same time, there was a video installation by Jaak Kilmi and Andres Maimik, which was actually a lot of footage shot in the cityscapes of Estonia. So it was not really an exhibition about buildings, although some photographs of buildings were present. And actually, I think one of the more prominent pieces that was on display was this film. Unfortunately, we tried to actually get the film. Yesterday there was an option to do it, but we just couldn't manage to sort it out to show it to you. But Andres Kurg actually wrote about the film in an interview afterwards. It was describing it as a self-ironic and narrative film that frees us from the serious atmospheres associated with architecture, and argued that it presented a problematic relationship between architecture and the social machine needed for its realization. And it was a moment where I think there was a bit of disappointment on all sides. First of all, I think at that time very young and kind of ambitious curators somewhat failed to meet the, I would not call it a demand, but rather the ambition of the Architects Union to really show Estonian architecture as something meaningful or something that's kind of worth showing. And at that time, by this film, there was a certain kind of criticism towards also the new built environment and this kind of discrepancy with the society. So years went on, 4 years, we skipped one Biennale, I think there was 2002 in between. And the next project, again organized by the Architects Association, was won by a young Estonian, I think he's an interior architect, Kristjan Holm, with something even more radically kind of non-architectural. So the Biennale project was about outhouses, a concept of kind of vernacular toilets in Estonian setting. And the kind of masterpiece was in Estonian called the hobupeldik, which was a toilet shaped as a horse. And this was shown inside Giardini. Also, this raised a lot of questions about if this, I would actually quote Kalle Vellevoog in the back, who afterwards, in an interview, kind of voiced a concern about the message, stating that its message was nothing more than that funny outhouses are built here in Estonia. Kind of also kind of illustrating a bit of concern about the image of Estonian architecture and how it's being voiced out to the world. But at the same time, this kind of vernacular and kind of self-built architecture is not something completely out of the discourse of architecture. And this is two images by Leonhard Lapin again. The one on the left is simply titled Donkey Hut, which kind of draws inspiration from Tatlin's monument, from the kind of constructivist Russia. And actually, if you look closely, I don't know if you can pinpoint on the screen, but I can show it here. It's actually also on that chessboard on display here. So it actually found its way, or manifested its way onto becoming one really important piece of Estonian architecture per Leonhard Lapin. So the next Biennale, again organized by Estonian Association of Architects, took a completely different route. Perhaps in one way a bit closer to what the Biennale had in mind. At least this time we had one office, architect's office, working on it. A practice that's actually doing real architecture as well. But probably in the wind of the theme of the general Biennale, which was organized by Richard Burdett, the joint space kind of in its own original way, quite nicely kind of coincided with the main theme of the Biennale that asked for more sidewalks and less Guggenheim. And what they did was they actually took, because I think Ülar Mark, the head of the office, for a long time was also the city architect of Narva and also rooted in this discourse of city planning in Estonia, alongside with other kind of a younger generation of architects. They came up with the idea to match geography, urban mapping, and also the kind of possibilities of mobile positioning, and to kind of make sense of that in a kind of urban scale. So it roughly doesn't really kind of fit into this chess or checkers, but rather I would call it checkers, because it's not really showing anything really important as a kind of architectural masterpiece, but it's rather setting the playing field and to kind of provide a new way of thinking about architecture. So in 2008, something completely different again organized. I think this time it was by gossip. This is not, probably someone remembers better. Salto and Maarja Kask, Ralf Lõoke from Salto, and Neeme Külm and Ingrid Rudi more or less said that they had to organize everything by themselves. But again, the brief and the competition was held by the Architects Association. And their proposal, actually, this is again a time where an architecture office is exhibiting work. And in terms of Salto, I think they could also just exhibit their buildings and be really a valuable exhibition, because they are actually one of the more progressive offices in Estonia. And but they decided not to exhibit their work, but rather to play a bit of a trick, also in terms of the framework of Venice and its kind of geopolitical and political motivations. So the background story is that during that time, I don't remember which gas pipe, Nord Stream 1 or 2, it doesn't really matter even. So there was a plan to build a gas pipe from St. Petersburg to Germany through the Baltic Sea. And they picked up on that, and actually their installation was to literally build a gas pipe inside of the giardini between the two pavilions. It was a huge sensation, probably also because of its public, really central location and its kind of playful trick on the kind of geopolitical situation that it tried to describe. Obviously, they also had to rent a space, so they basically had the installation in Giardini and the empty space in the Arsenale as a kind of rule dictated by the Biennale organizers. This was really loved by Aaron Betsky, who was the head curator, and he always would use this as a kind of central space where to kind of show how infrastructure plays a big role in also kind of tangling up the relationships inside the Biennale. But then this was it for Kalle. This was it for Kalle. Kalle Vellevoog, who's been an active figure also in the field of architecture since the beginning of 90s, and also a big part of the Architects Association, and also a big part of how the Biennale so far have been organized, in an interview again said, next time we should be back with real architecture. So it was about time we really get a piece of chess in Venice. So I don't know if it was organized or it was really that much of energy that was coming out of Kalle. But the next exhibition, 100 Houses, was literally showing 100 houses. The background story is that during a period of time, roughly 20 years, a lot of the houses that were of good architecture quality were private houses commissioned by Estonian people. And this somewhat was a kind of good compact package of pieces of chess to be on display and contextualized. And a lot of good architecture was on display actually, and it was somewhat well, let's put it like this. I actually wrote a quote about it. The staggeringly large number of projects sounds like a testament to the arrival of Western welfare society, where everyone gets what they want for $100. Clients get their dream home, designers get their opportunity to create high-quality architecture, unique creations, and recently established Estonian Architecture Center began organizing biennials by doing a long-awaited Estonian exhibition of houses designed by Estonian architects. And this is, actually, this is an ongoing debate, also very prominent sentence, usually in the brief to do the Biennale, is that you should display Estonian architecture, you should show how Estonian architecture is relevant in a wider discourse, which is completely fine. And now going back to 2012, another building being shown in Venice. Actually, a building that we started today with. It's the Civic Hall of Tallinn, designed by Rainer Karp for the Moscow Olympics in the 1980s. But it's actually showing that building not so much as great it is, but rather its problems and its decay, and asking how long is the life of the building. And it's not just this building that it addressed, it did build the exhibition up on this example, but it was also, it's a kind of ongoing topic that references back to other buildings that were built during Soviet time of high architectural quality. So the issue was not only the poor construction quality of the Soviet era, but rather the rift that arose was far more fundamental. And the turn towards the West that accompanied the restoration of independence changed both the political order and the users of architecture. And there was less and less desire to preserve and love the heritage that we had. And this led to very, very kind of quick decline of these buildings because they were not really loved anymore. And now we're in 2014. This is where me, Johanna, and Team Tuxam took stage. The backstory is that having already read into the history of Estonian architecture biennales, and having just read the brief to kind of display kind of high quality Estonian architecture, but also having read Rem Koolhaas's manifesto, because this was the year that Rem Koolhaas was the head curator of the Biennale, where he completely tried to flip the script by saying that that right now we're witnessing 100 years of decay of the National Pavilion and the national architecture, and everything is becoming more and more international. So the background story of how this exhibition came to be selected was that actually it was an anonymous essay that you had to write, proposing the topics that you would be interested in exploring. So it was not really a fixed project, not a fixed exhibition design, but rather a theme. So in the wind of Rem Koolhaas's ideas about kind of history of something, and to kind of explore a history of something, we chose to explore the history of public space. And as a kind of background, it was a time of kind of digital revolution in terms of mass media, in terms of governing and kind of e-state functionalities. And we found the kind of relationship between real physical public space and its digital counterpart to be something quite interesting to look at. And we all had a background not in Estonia. We were actually just finishing our university education in Vienna, where kind of digital culture already was much more embraced. So this led us to kind of mix and match together somewhat exhibition about architecture, but also about digital networks and digital technologies. And actually, we did have some real architecture. We inspected and studied the history of public spaces that would evolve around the old town of Tallinn in this defense ring. So the old town is here, and then we would take a mission to map out and kind of arrange the history of all those public spaces that would, over 100 years, be developed in Tallinn in that time frame, throughout different ideologies, throughout different times, and to kind of try to understand what's permanent, what's changing. And the actual fun part of the installation for us was to kind of come up with this kind of digital public space inside the exhibition space. It was all interactive. A lot of people loved it. No one understood it. There was a lot of confusion about what's going on, but it was fun and engaging. So a lot of people were really just kind of walking around, not trying to understand anything. As we were also kind of taken by this digital anxiety and all these kind of new information technologies, we somewhat put the Estonian and also the architectural part in the very background. So it kind of disappeared a bit. At the opening of the 2014 Biennale, I've met up with some friends from Latvia and Lithuania to also express this kind of anxiety towards this nation state, and the architecture has to be shown as something that's coming out of Estonia. And while talking to Dagny Smilga from Latvia, she also said that, I know, it's so frustrating that we have to talk about Estonian architecture, Latvian architecture, and we have to put out the kind of, almost the brief asks for kind of like a fair box to be kind of showing as a package of that's good Estonian architecture, that's good Latvian architecture. So we decided to do something about it, and not in terms of really to kind of say what's good or bad, but rather to kind of flip the idea to be framed, or to kind of the question to be framed in a bigger scale. And we tried to kind of establish a kind of ground for Baltic architecture. And this was a time where we took a kind of quest
to not do an Estonian pavilion, but rather to do a Baltic pavilion that would consist of the Estonian, Latvian, and Lithuanian participation. And the only logical thing to show was a map of the Baltic states. So basically the exhibition was a series of projects that were trying to map the kind of underlying forces, even to rock bottom, to geology of what really determines what Estonian architecture, what Latvian architecture, what is the kind of ground onto which all these kind of architectures emerge from. And this was actually mostly based on the research that was carried out by Jonas Rukauskas at the Architectural Association, where he actually took the Baltic states as his kind of project and tried to kind of figure out what are the forces shaping it. And it was a kind of model that really worked well for us to kind of like take the map of the Baltics and to kind of populate it with different projects. So if you ask me if this is chess or checkers, it's a bit of both. It's a kind of hybrid game where a lot of different pieces are on the board. And actually, a funny side note, we tried to do the pavilion in the Nordic pavilion because we got an early start around, as we already knew in 2014 that we would really love to do the next one as well. We started working on it even with if there wasn't a call for the next pavilion. We kind of had an agenda and we collaborated with 9 of us together to kind of figure out what this would mean. We even started negotiation if we even do have to have the competitions or the open calls, so we can just skip forward and to kind of have this exception once to do it in a kind of completely different arrangement. It didn't work out. We had to win 3 different competitions. But as we started quite early, we had quite a significant proposal for all of these 3 different countries. A lot of questions were asked. A lot of people were very skeptic about it. And even the head of Lithuanian Art Museum quoted famously saying that to do a Baltic pavilion is impossible, but as you don't know it's impossible, it might be possible. So again, this kind of young energy of being a bit stupid and ignorant towards a lot of the processes that usually dictate how things are done led us to be successful in this. In 2018 came a weak monument that actually looked at architecture from a bit of a different angle, bringing back kind of very practical ideas of how architecture emerges from almost nothing, out of very simple kind of ideas. One of the most kind of famous examples of a weak monument is actually a staircase of a typical Estonian wooden house. And to apply to fire regulations, the staircase was built out of stone as a contrast to the rest of the building. And over time, this becomes the kind of symbol of a Tallinn type of house. So it was a project that was really trying to deal with the ordinary and how with using ordinary, you can actually come up with something quite meaningful. Yeah. Their quote, again with pavement, where does the monument end, the paving stone start? Looking at scaffoldings and all the kind of different types of ad hoc strategies in order to kind of give meaning and to different spatial ideas. And this was a time where actually Estonia was starting slowly to celebrate its 100-year anniversary. And again comes into play Architects Union. And they actually they came up with this beautiful idea of organizing competitions for small towns to design new city squares for these small declining towns. And the next exposition called Square, Positively Shrinking, was actually trying to display those projects. In a way, again, an exhibition about projects, but it was really showing and being in a way, also critical about a lot of processes that have been shaping Estonian public space and also planning ideas since, again, the re-independence. So this is one of the examples of those squares. I think, I can't remember how many have been built and how many have been planned, but it was around 15 to 20. I don't, but again, this was in a way a very compact set of ideas, quite well executed. All these squares have been carried out from public competitions, so it's actually always kind of selected projects and always of high quality. Obviously, the quality of execution depends on the municipalities that build them and also a bit on their budgets. But as a whole, this was quite nice to see. Although every effort towards positive change is commendable, in this mentality of hastily fixing things, there was a kind of clear criticism about what has not been done so far in terms of planning, describing between the lines the low point of spatial planning at the municipality level and the architectural community's secret longing for a state architect. So what is important is that all these processes in small Estonia are happening despite of the Biennale, but that at times some of these issues are kind of put into forefront on the Biennale. So after that, in 2023 comes Homestage, that was already discussed today, so I'm not going to speak too much about it, but like was mentioned before, it actually uses its concept quite beautifully in Venice by talking about real estate, by occupying real estate in Venice. And yeah, this was kind of discussed, so I'm not going to get too deep into that. What I think was beautiful is that that the exhibition brought in actors, but at the same time, to me, there's a bit of a problem with that, because as architects we're tied to in a way to the real estate market, and in a way our hands are tied, and it was quite maybe the contrast of the actor to play out emotionally in the apartment actually works really well with the idea that actually architects are not free to do all if they want to build. Now we come to the last one, also discussed today, so I don't have to go into too much detail about this project either. But as was said before, I think the idea of taking something that comes from top down, the kind of climate goals and the need to act, and how that resonates with the kind of bottom-up housing co-op, and the kind of trickery that they use the housing co-op as a kind of scenario, or kind of play out different scenarios. I think that puts the rather boring topic of insulating a house into a rather beautiful or exciting context. Okay, this is the Homestage quote is wrong, but yeah, as I said before. So now we've kind of come full circle with all the projects, and I would like to just maybe add a few remarks about the relevance of going to the Biennale. Obviously, one way to look at it is that it's kind of putting your work or putting Estonia's work out to the bigger international audience. But I think as important as are the international field of architecture, it's more important of what it does for Estonia and for the local community. So for the thinkers, exhibiting in Venice also keeps the tension in understanding contemporary architecture, and thus also keeps local architecture writers busy, because it seems that every exhibition only reaches its deeper dimension in the catalog texts, perhaps only in the post-exhibition critical reviews. And then the talkers, looking back at all the exhibitions from perspective of promoting spatial culture, it can be considered even more important how each such development of thought stirs the waters in our little pond. So it's also kind of trying to talk to the viewers. The biennial, played out through exhibitions, is by nature regular and has similarities to a chess or checkers board, which by its very nature sets the basic rules to be followed, but still leaves enough room for play. The significance of these exhibitions may not be related to architecture on display, but rather to the fact that it's displayed in an exhibition format. And then practitioners. And I think it's crucial to create a communicative platform in the exhibition space where the authors of the exhibitions can contribute to a more precise definition of contemporary space, and conversely, throw a bone in the teeth of their opponents or dissenters. And I think all in all, this feeds, in Estonia, a rather small community of people concerned about architecture. And I think the exhibition format has the potential for a benign ideological reckoning within the architectural community. And we can argue that by describing the built environment, an architectural exhibition can shed light on our actions and omissions, see the good or criticism around us, and in any case, tap into our collective conscience in organization of this space. That's it.
Aitäh. Any questions? Kas on küsimusi praegu kohe? Vist ei. Aitäh sulle.